Hi there, we're going to be getting Microsoft 365 group data today. So group members, group owners, and information about groups, and pulling it into Power BI to do reporting with. And to give you an idea what kind of data is returned from Power Automate, this is a query of groups in my tenant. So you can see that if you scroll through here, you've got the description for the group, the display name, what type of group it is, if it's got an email address, the email address, whether or not it's mail enabled, whether or not it's linked to a team, whether or not it's security enabled, and whether it's public or private. And this will return not just Microsoft 365 Teams groups, but also Azure Active Directory groups and distribution groups. So it's, they call it get O365 groups in the action, but it actually gets more than that. So the membership, and for the membership, the query for getting group members, called list group members, is not get the owners, but I'm going to show you how to get the owners today with a different action. And that'll let you take their email address, UPN, phone number, and I think the job title. I'm only pulling a few fields into here because I don't have my Microsoft 365 profiles filled out, so everything is pretty much blank. But we can also get information about whether or not the user is an external user based on their UPN. Potentially, you could, as part of your Power BI report, add row level security so that group owners see the groups that they are the owner of and can audit the membership of those groups. This is a little bit more of a lightweight process than the Azure access reviews because those are, they're a little bit intense. So with the Azure access reviews, if you don't respond to them in time, it'll remove everybody from your group. So, and we can also do look up this way of who's a member of what group. So I can say Linda is a member of these groups here, and I can create a link. So if I say click on this one here, it'll open up the group in Azure, the membership for the group, and I can go in and add and remove members here. Well, let's jump into how to make the Power Automate flow. So I'm making a scheduled flow in Power Automate. So I'm going to go to new flow and choose the scheduled flow option. You could run this daily, you could run it weekly, you could run it monthly. It just depends on how often you're going to be using the data. This can be, depending on the size of your organization, this can be a pretty lengthy query if you've got thousands of groups and you're iterating over each one of those to get the membership. So if you're in a larger organization, you probably don't want to be running this daily just because you'll run out of resources. I'm going to choose a name here. Definitely don't run it every minute. I'm going to go for month right now. So I'm going to make two variables, one to hold the group members and one to hold the group owners, because they're going to be two different queries. One for group members, and make this an array variable type. Same thing for your group owners. And then the next thing we need to do is get our group information. So I'm going to search in the bar for list groups. And if I use this filter over here, this Office 365 groups category, it's in here. So list groups is going to pull all of our group information, but it doesn't have the membership. So now we need to make a apply to each loop to iterate over those groups and get the membership for each one. So I'm going to choose apply to each. And for the input, I'm going to use the values of list groups. So there's the rows. And then I'm going to add an action to that for list group members. And just as an FYI, I tried running this flow as a user that was not an administrator, and it was still able to get all of the information about the groups, which kind of surprised me. I expected it to be something that requires admin access, but if you don't need to get all groups and you just want to get the groups that you are an owner of, you can also use this for your list group steps. Just use the list groups that I own and belong to instead. But we're going to get all groups here for this example. So I'm going to choose list group members. And for the group ID, when you click in the box, it'll give you a drop down, but instead of selecting something, just click on enter custom value and then select group ID. So now we have our list of group members. What we need to do next is for each of those group members, add them to our array variable because we need to collect them all together. So I'm going to add another apply to each loop. And for this one, we're going to use the value of the list group members step. So make sure you're selecting the right one because there's two and they look very similar now. And then we're going to add an action to append to array variable. And we're going to select our group members variable here because we're getting the members. And then for the value of this, the response for the list group members has all kinds of data in it, but the thing is if you just store that data into your variable, it doesn't include the group ID. So you'll have all of your members, but you won't know necessarily which group ID those members belong to unless you also put that in your array variable. So we're going to kind of DIY it a little bit here. I'm going to rename this. You can pull whatever information you want to use into here, so you don't need to follow exactly what I'm using, just kind of follow the basic format. All right, so our value, we're going to do a curly bracket, go down a line, and then do double quotes, UPN. That's our user principal name, so that's the unique ID for the user. It's usually their email address. And then another colon, another double quotes, and search for the user principal name over here. Double quotes, comma, down a line. Then we want user ID. So user ID is going to be right here. So double quotes, comma. And then we want the group ID because we need to be able to relate back to our group information. And the group ID is not included with the list group members results. So let's keep scrolling down to the list groups section here and pull it from there. And then we're going to do one more row. And this one I'm going to make up. So this one I'm going to call userRole, colon, and then I'm just going to put text in here. I'm going to call this member. So this is defining whether the user is a member or an owner. And then no comma after that line, close the curly brackets. All right, so that got all of our group member information. Now we need to get our group owner information because the owners are not included in the get members. So for that, we're going to do an HTTP request, and it's going to be outside of this loop. So don't put it in the loop, put it below the loop. I should probably rename this too, actually. Send HTTP request. There's a whole bunch of these. You got to find the right one. So it's the one with Office 365 groups under it here, this one. And for the URI, I'll paste this in here. So it's HTTPS, oops, I forgot the H. https://graph.microsoft.com/v1.0/groups, and then we're going to input on the end of this the group ID. So we're running this on all of the groups. We're going to get the group ID, put that in there, and then a / and owners. Oh, and something else to keep in mind is if you are in an organization that has a lot of groups, the list groups action up here, I should have mentioned this earlier, list groups, go to the settings for it. So by default, it's only going to return 100 items because that's the limit of the action. But you can, if you turn on pagination and set the threshold to above whatever you think your max group number is going to be, then you can get more. So I think the maximum is 100,000, I want to say. So probably you won't hit that, but you will need to increase it above 100 if you think you have more than 100 groups and turn pagination on. And same thing for your group members. So this list group members, if you think your group is going to have more than 100 members in it, you're going to need to go to settings for that one and then turn pagination on and increase the threshold to more than whatever you think the number of people is going to be in a group. All right, so this HTTP request is going to return JSON, and we need to parse the JSON in order to refer to parts of it. So we actually, the parse JSON step wants you to generate a schema. So in order to get that schema, I'm going to save this flow and run it and copy the response from this action and paste it into the generate from sample window. So I'm going to save it, and we're going to test it to run it. I'm just going to do manually run. Okay, so I'm going to open up this HTTP request action here and get the body. And so I'm going to just do Control A, Control C, and then I can paste it into the sample box on the parse JSON step. So I'm going to edit the flow, add an action below this. I'm going to add the parse JSON action. And then for content, I'm going to give it the body of the send an HTTP request v2. And for the schema, I'm going to click on this generate from sample and paste in our response from before and click on done. So that gave us a schema, and you're going to want to look at this schema. So I'm going to just paste this into a text editor. So the thing with the parse JSON step is that if you have any null values in here, particularly the string fields can return an error. The first thing I would do is take out any of these that you're definitely not going to use. So for example, business phone, I don't need the business phone in this data set. So I'm going to take that out. And the job title is always going to be blank for me. So I'm going to remove that. Mobile phone office location, preferred language, same thing. And then do the same thing from the bottom here. So if you expect any of these string fields to be blank, but you still want to use them in your data set, I would put in here the type, put brackets around it like this, and then do a comma and null, and close the brackets. Oops, 2 L's and null. So what that's going to do is make it not fail if it's blank. And then just copy and paste this back into your schema box here. Now we're going to do kind of the same thing that we did under our group members step, which was to add and apply to each loop. And then for each value in our body from our parse JSON step, we are going to append to array variable. Now we're going to get that in our owners array variable. And for the values, what you want to do with this is make sure that your fields are in the same order and are the same as the ones up here, because we're going to end up with these in the same table. And if you don't have the same fields, then when you expand it out, it's going to be a little bit funky. So I'm going to do brackets, and then you can just copy paste this and then update things if you want to. So maybe I'll do that here just for clarity's sake. Take those out, but use the same structure as before. So remove this, and we're going to change this word here to owner. All right, so for our UPN, we're going to want the user principal name from our parse JSON step, and insert these between the double quotes. And ID for the user ID. For the group ID, we want the same group ID as before. So that one was this one down here. All right, so that's ready to go. We can rename this. All right, so now we're going to compose our 2 array variables. I like to put these into a list so that when we connect to it in Power BI, we can just expand out the whole thing all at once, but you could do 2 separate tables for this if you wanted to. So I'm going to do compose. And then for our inputs, I'm going to do square brackets and our group members, then a comma, group owners variable, and then close the square brackets. We can rename this, compose owners and members. All right, so now we need to send this data somewhere. You could send it to SQL if you wanted to, but that's going to be a premium connector. I'm going to send it to a file in SharePoint because that is included with the standard licensing. And if we make these JSON files, then the action of creating that file is going to be super straightforward because these are already in JSON, so we don't have to convert them or change the formatting at all. We just dump it into a file. I'm going to use the create file action in SharePoint. Select my site and my folder I want to put it in. And for the file name, I'm going to do 2 files. I'm going to do one for the groups and one for the membership. So my first file is going to be groups.json. For the file content, I'm going to do the body of the list group step, and the body cards never show up for some reason unless you search for them. So search for the word body, look for list groups, and select that one. We can rename this to, and the other thing you want to do here is turn off chunking. So go to the ellipses menu, settings, and turn off chunking, and that's going to let you overwrite the file with this flow. And you need to be able to overwrite since it's running on a schedule. And then do one more of the same thing. This one is going to be groupMembers.json. And for this one, we want to give it the compose output. So we're just going to search here through this one right here and turn off chunking for this one too. All right, so let's save and run this. All right, so our flow ran successfully. I'm going to go to the SharePoint site where it sent the files. Our two files are groupMembers and groups.json. So I'm going to download both of these, and I'm going to show you why in a second. So the way I like to connect to things in Power BI is I'll download it first, and then I'll change the file path from local to SharePoint. I find that easier than using the SharePoint folder connector. And then go to Power BI, and we're going to go to Get Data and More, and choose the JSON option, connect, and then select our file. So groups, and then the other one, do the same thing. All right, so new source, more, and JSON, group members. All right, so we have our groups and our members. I'm gonna change the reference to this to SharePoint now that I've connected. So back in our SharePoint site, if I open the details pane, which is this little eye icon in the top right, and then go to the bottom here, there's an option, there's a section called path, and it's got a icon next to it. So click the icon to copy the path for the file. And you want this path, not the one that you get when you open the file, because if you open this up, it'll just be a preview URL. So you don't want this one, you want the one in the path and the details. So I'm going to go back here, and for our groups, I'm going to go back to the source step, click the gear icon next to it, and then overwrite this file path with the SharePoint path, and click OK. And then do the same thing for the group members. All right, so we're connected to both of our files in SharePoint. So that means when we schedule a refresh on the Power BI report, it's going to automatically go to SharePoint and get the updated file each time. This groups query, there's a column called group types here. We can expand this. The provisioning options, I think we want, yes, that's whether or not it's a Teams group. And you can rename these fields at this point to clean things up a bit. All right, so something cool we can do here if we want to is create our hyperlink to go to the Manage Membership screen in Azure. So that'll make it so that we can do conditional formatting in our Power BI reports, that people can click a group to manage the membership. So if we go to Azure here, in the groups category, if we open up one of these groups and then go to members, you'll see that the URL has a particular pattern. So what we can do is copy this and create a column formula that basically generates that same URL. So I'm going to go to add column and do custom column. I'm going to call this manage members. And we want this to be on the groups table, not on the group members table. And I'm just going to paste this in double quotes. You'll see the group ID here. So we have that in our information. So I'm going to close the quotes right after the / after group ID. And I'm going to take out this GUID here. And I'm going to do an and sign, and then I'm going to double click on the group ID from our data. So this one here, and do a space and another and then put quotes around the rest of the URL. So I've got this string, group ID, and then the rest of the strings. So that should get us the URL for the manage group membership page in Azure. And we can test this out just by copying one of these and making sure it works. Okay, that did work. This group happens to have no members in it. So It's not really a good example, but you get the idea. And you can do the same thing for the owners. So the only difference between the members and the owners is this part right here where it has the word members. You just replace this with the word owners, and it'll make a URL to the owner management screen. All right, so I'm going to close and apply this. So now we need to create a relationship between those two tables. So our group members and our groups, this value ID is the group ID. I should have renamed these, but I'm trying to be quick in this tutorial. So this is related to the group ID. So I'm just going to drag it on top of there, and that'll relate the two. And if you want to be able to do a lookup and say, what groups is this person a member of? You're going to want to set this to bidirectional. So if you double click on the relationship and set it to cross filter direction of both, that'll let you filter groups on people. All right, so I'm just going to set up a few quick visuals so you get the idea of how this works. So I'm going to do our groups first. I'm just going to add a table to this page, drop in our group display name, group type, email address, whether it's mail enabled, and the visibility. And then we can drop in our manage membership link here. So that was this one. And we need to set this one to, if I click on it, we need to set the data category to web URL to get it to format as a hyperlink. And then you can change this to a small icon instead of the full URL under the visual settings, the URL icon group. And we can rename these in the visual too. I'll just do that real quick. And then we can add a slicer with our group member lookup. So that's the UPN. I'm going to remove blanks. And then set it to a drop down. Got our role. I'm just going to put the group name down here too, so you can see. All right, so this will let us filter our groups by their membership. So I can click on one of these and it'll cross filter the table at the bottom to show you who's a member of the group. And now we can do RLS if we want to, so row level security, so that people can see the groups that they own. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the groups table. I'm going to add a column to the groups table that shows the UPN of the group owner so that we can use that in the row level security column. Call this group owners. So calculated is important here because we want it to use the relationship when it's concatenating the values. If you don't do this, it'll dump all of the values from the table into the field. So I'm going to calculate concatenate X. So concatenate X is going to iterate over members and pull in whatever information we want. So I'm going to filter our members table by the role equals owner. And we're going to get the UPN. And then for the delimiter, we're just going to use a comma. You can use whatever here. And then you can sort it if you want to. I don't need to sort it, so I'm just going to go with that. All right. You could add this to your table if you want to. So the group owners you could throw in there. All right, so we're going to use this for our row level security. So I've got, so under the modeling tab, you can go to manage roles, add a new role, call this owner filtering. And we're going to put the security filter on the groups table. And I'm going to use the DAX editor because I can't, the new visual editor doesn't have what I want to use in it. So we're going to do contain string. And then we're going to give it our owner column on our groups table. So it was, what do we call this? It's groups, group owners. And then we're going to put in the text that we want it to contain. So in this case, I would want it to be userPrincipalName. So that's the logged in user in Power BI. So what this is going to do is for whoever is logged in, if they are an owner of the group, it's going to show them the rows for that table, because this will evaluate to true if they are a group owner. And we're using contains because the group can have multiple owners and we don't have a separate owner dimension. So we're just going to use that. Click OK. So now if we test this, go to view as, I'm going to view as, so we select both of these checkboxes and then type in her email address here to test it. And click OK. So you can see that that filtered it down. So she's only the member of one group, and that's this group. So she would be able to easily look at this report and say, oh, is this membership correct? Yes or no? And then if it's not, she could go to manage members and manage the access there. And just make sure to remember to add your users to the role when you publish your report in the Power BI service. So you need to, usually what I like to do if I'm using dynamic row level security like this, where it's using their user principal name, just add everybody to the roles. So usually companies will have an Active Directory group that has all employees on it. So you can just add that to the role, and then the report will automatically be filtered by whoever is viewing the report. You don't have to worry about ad hoc adding individual people to different things. And when you schedule a refresh on this, because your data source is in SharePoint Online, you don't have to use a gateway to schedule your refresh. So you can just schedule it, enter credentials. I would use the service account credentials for the refresh. Make sure the service account has access to SharePoint, and then you should be good to go. So that's everything I have for you today. So that was how to get your groups, group membership, and group owners from Microsoft 365 and use that data in Power BI. Thank you for watching.